Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Hello, Mr. Chairman.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's see, we've got one, two, three, four of us, and then we got Mary from our consultants, and Angela is here too. Hello, Angie. How are you?
I'm well. How are you, Bill?
I'm doing great. We just got our vaccine appointment, for next
Very
week.
nice.
So we're real happy about that.
Good.
Happy for you, Bill. You and Peggy.
Great. I'll send you all the info that we got if you want to call. Hello, Bill.
Try that again. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Billy.
Hey. Well,
Mary, it's nice to see a face to go with the voice. That's Wade Burns here. It looks like
Yes.
you're coming to us from Joe Biden's basement, though. Is that?
I know, and I'm glowing from all of the screens and my desk lamp. Sorry about that. The overhead light creates a halo. I am an angel, but kind of distracting too. I haven't.
we'd heard you described as an angel before.
Yes, that's right. Don't that. My husband probably wouldn't say that, but.
Well, I think we've got a quorum and it's 10:30, and so why don't we start? And we're glad everybody is here. Let's have a moment of silence. Amen. And the agenda Scott sent out, and would someone like to move adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. And Scott, thank you for the agenda and for the minutes. The first thing he submitted in a second email this morning, you would have gotten the correct draft minutes from the last meeting. Were there any changes or corrections that anyone would like to move?
Wasn't any clearer for me reading the minutes than it was here in the presentation. I'm still in a fog on a lot of it, but I moved on the minutes, approval of the
Me
minutes.
too. I'm glad Mary is here too. And Mason is seconding. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, thank you. So Scott, I'm going to just turn the meeting over to you and let you lead us through it with Mary and Alex and Angie if they want to join too. And Angie, can you see everybody's here for your minutes to see who's here? Okay,
It's like
Great.
Alan's joining us, I believe.
okay, sure.
Okay, and can everyone hear me?
Yes.
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 All right. Well, first off, I apologize for the minutes mishap this morning. I was doing something too quickly with funny file naming conventions. So anyway, I am going to share my screen in a moment. The presentation that I have developed for this morning. Let's see. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Alex, if you're there, do I need to log back in under a different link?
You do not. I just made you a host, so you should be
Okay.
the chair at this point.
Okay. There we go. Okay. Go back up. Can everyone see a PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So, a couple of these slides you saw last time. I just wanted to hopefully try and clarify a few things. So I'm going to go through this, and if you've got any urgent questions, I'd be glad to answer them during the presentation, but my preference would be for you to just make a note of the content or the image that you see in a given slide, and I can follow up after the presentation, if that's okay. So with that, again, just kind of a high level, what are we talking about with stormwater regulations? I call them the 2 WQs. It's either quality or quantity. Can you drink it? Is it going to flood your house? Temperature is a much more, I don't want to say esoteric element of water pollution, but it's another element that's there. Basically, if a stream has no tree cover next to it and the water is a higher temperature than fish or aquatic life can be supported by, or in cases of industrial pollution where you've got a factory or a power plant putting ultra warm water into a lake or stream that is generally much cooler than that. So that's just in a nutshell the temperature pollution. We're also talking about two key phases of stormwater management. On the front end, it can be called pre-construction or in-construction measures, is erosion and sediment control. A couple of examples here, things like silt fences, gravel entrances to construction sites, wattles, or basically stormwater filtering and attenuation elements there on the right. I make note, just in bold there, a bold highlight, that Buncombe County standards are what the town currently defaults to for all things erosion and sediment control. Stormwater management is the other aspect of stormwater. It's what's construed as post-construction measures, things like a bioretention bay in a parking lot or next to a house, or if you're doing rainwater capture, that's also considered stormwater management aspect. So I'm going to try and walk through this as best I can. I titled the slide, North Carolina, All Water Isn't the Same, because the DWQ, which is the Division of Water Quality through the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ, lots of acronyms, apologize, classifies waters within the state in a couple of different ways. And I realize this is a lot of text. In a moment, I'll show you some graphics, which can kind of probably put a bit more meaning to this. But real quick, Class C waters, that's kind of the baseline standard for all waters in the state. For example, Swananoa River is Class C. Then you can have other primary classifications, Class B and what are called WS designations, that's water supply. A couple of examples here, the French Broad River is Class B. So that is, it's a little confusing, and I'm still working through understanding per school grades if A is best, or at least in this case where I'm looking at this, C class is actually better than B class, just assuming that the French Broad is taking in a lot more ambient runoff and pollution. Two other examples here. WSIV is a very common watershed designation throughout the state. An example of this is the Catawba River in Lake Norman, Mountain Island Lake in the Charlotte area. That is Charlotte's primary drinking water source. And closer by, just over the ridge from Montreat, is Asheville's Burnett Reservoir, aka the North Fork Dam. That's a water supply 1 designation, and that's certainly a very high designation given that all the watershed around there is completely untouched forest. Moving on to supplemental classifications. These are things that are added on to the primary classifications. So in a moment, I'll show you that Montreat has several Class C waters. And a few of those waters are actually what are called high quality waters. There are no trout waters, at least within the Montreat watershed. If you go just over the ridge east to McDowell County, Catawba River watershed, there are plenty of trout water designations. So, can everyone see the map here?
Yes.
Thumbs up?
Yep. Scott, after this, will you mind sending all this out to people, just emailing them so we'll have them?
Absolutely, certainly.
Right. Thanks.
So looking at the map here, let's start at the bottom and kind of look where quote unquote town is. If you see that yellow overlay with the C's on it, can everyone see that?
Yes.
So those correspond with the table of surface water classifications that are highlighted. So that's the portion of Flat Creek from Big Piney Branch to the Swannanoa River, Little Piney Branch, Kitchen Branch, and Punchin Branch. So keep in mind, those are just basic garden variety Class C waters. Once you go up into the ETJ, those waters are considered Class C plus high quality waters. And those are basically, by and large, running down from the green space that is the upper part of the cove and the ridges. A small portion of it does, if you see Slady Branch and the portion of Flat Creek that run by properties that are within the ETJ or the extraterritorial jurisdiction, that's a factor there that I'll get to in a moment. But just wanted to give you a quick introduction of what the state classifies surface waters as and what we have locally here in Montreat. So, and I realize this is a lot of text, but I tried to highlight relevant sections. If you look right at center in the middle, Class C waters, that's what Montreat has in the majority of its quote unquote built up area in town. In terms of allowable densities and stream buffers, I'm reading this as saying that there are no restrictions and none required for erosion and sediment control. That's not, and I should note that when you see the term stream buffers, it can actually be, it can be the same stream buffer, but it's for those two phases. So erosion and sediment control and post-construction. So just keeping that in mind. This table is from 2011. So I just put that caveat out there that it's 9 years old, but it is currently available information on DEQ's website. It's a little confusing because it's saying that stream buffers long-term are not required, but if you look at the column where there's erosion and sediment controls, standard rules apply. So, and I realize I may have just said incorrectly that erosion and sediment controls do not apply. So let me rephrase that. According to this chart, erosion and sediment controls apply to all water bodies, whether it's basic Class C or Class C plus high quality water. That's the HQW. So in terms of long-term buffers, again, it's the differentiation between erosion and sediment control. You got to put up the silt fences and all that while you're building something, versus the post-construction stormwater standards, i.e. maintaining the amount of water that's running off your property for either water quality or flooding concerns. Those are the two separate things there. And I'll get to a little bit more explanation in just a moment. This is a snapshot from the state's erosion and sediment control planning and design manual. And I think it's a key illustration of how both erosion and sediment control measures, again, the front end, and post-construction measures, the back end, can vary across the state, and they are very often indexed to slopes. Montreat, for the most part, is not a flat coastal plain, eastern North Carolina county or location. It's got plenty of topography. So just assuming that even if you're over 5% slope, according to that table, you're probably going to have a buffer, again, for erosion sediment control, upwards of 25 feet wide. So that's, and that corresponds with the county's standards, which I'll reiterate in a moment, which the town follows for erosion sediment control. Another law that I've found referenced, at least in the city of Asheville's erosion sediment control and stormwater ordinances, refers to the state's Environmental Management Commission. Kind of diving into the weeds for a moment here, but I felt like these sections of state law, which are circa 2006, so I still need to verify if they are still the most current standing law. They provide a bit of insight into how the laws are applied, and I'll just walk through those real quickly. So it's the top that's highlighted there is stating what stormwater programs can do. Number 2 there, it's saying that development can occur in an area that would otherwise be required to place within a vegetative buffer required by the commission, provided that stormwater runoff from the entire impervious area essentially is held on site. This last section, B3, I think is an important distinction, and it's something I will honestly probably have to follow up more on, but I know it's been a question. Wade Burns on the existing stormwater ordinance within Montreat. This citation is stating that stormwater runoff rules and programs shall not require private property owners to install new or increase stormwater controls for existing development or redevelopment activities that do not remove or decrease existing stormwater controls. So I think that's an important distinction to make between something that is existing and any addition to it in quote unquote new construction. The last item that I'm highlighting here, I think is pretty definitive, that essentially built upon area is to be located 30 feet landward of all perennial and intermittent surface waters. That's, again, that's the long-term buffer. So that's not trying to differentiate. There's the erosion sediment control buffer, and then there is the long-term buffer of on this. That right there is stating that the 30-foot buffer or a long-term buffer exists. This is just
Scott, let me ask you, you said this is Buncombe County and the towns is different?
no, I know that the question has come up about when a 30-foot buffer applies to development along streams. So this really, the reason I was running through this is just trying to clarify its applicability.
But that's applicable generally. That's the Buncombe, not just Montreat.
That's correct.
Okay, that's what I want to know. Okay.
Well, and this is the state stormwater code that you're
Oh,
going
that's
through
right.
now.
That's right. Right, but it is carried through, at least in the instances I've seen, it's carried through in Montreat, it's carried through at the county, it's carried through the city of Asheville. It's a pretty well established standard.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. This is just a quick illustration of the state has a standing 50-foot buffer for the areas that are basically highlighted. They're all either highly urbanized, the Catawba River being Charlotte and the suburbs, Jordan Lake watershed, which is Chapel Hill, Durham, and Raleigh. And then the entire Pamlico obviously have had issues in the past with confined animal feeding operations, i.e. hog farms, nutrient loading in those rivers. So the state, at least in these river basins, has a standard of 50 feet. So that's 20 feet of managed vegetation and 30 feet of natural vegetation. That 30-foot standard, again, goes back to what we just saw of that is I won't call it an untouchable buffer, but it is a blanket standard across the state, whether or not you're in one of these designated special buffer zones, or if you're in the French Broad, Tennessee Broad, fill in the blank. Just wanted to give you a quick representation of what's going on across the state. So that image was from the previous image was from this text that's part of a riparian buffer report from 2016. I highlight all of this here to essentially lay out that I have at least seen reference to a variance process for these buffers. Essentially, the middle text there, major variances covering impacts to the inner zone of the buffer, i.e. inner being closer to the water, must be approved by the Environmental Management Commission. This text is noting that the EMC, the Environmental Management Commission, has routinely granted variances based on management of flows and mitigation of impacts. So essentially, if you're able to demonstrate that you are managing your stormwater on site outside of these buffers. I had this the previous time, and I think I realize it's a lot of information, but I think I could probably clarify this by saying at least the disturbance for the town, and I'll just reiterate the standards, essentially 5,000, 2,500 for 25,000 square feet, 2,500 square feet, or 24% impervious. That 24% impervious limit is referenced in the previous chart that I'd shown you. I'm going to go back to that just shortly to see if that's there. Yes, so tell me, can you all see my mouse?
Yes.
Okay, so I've been hunting for where the 24% impervious standard comes from, at least within Montreat's ordinance. Now, my only assumption is that it's specifically referenced in areas for water supply. Montreat does not have any water supply areas. However, if this level of development is allowed in supply areas, and I'm just going out on a limb here for a moment, logic would say that level of development would at least be allowed on a Class C water body that is not designated as water supply. Generally, most things that I have seen relating to stormwater impacts and impervious surfaces generally indicates that about 20 to 25% of built upon area is a threshold for stormwater impacts. The last section of that chart there basically just illustrates the treatment and stormwater standards. The most common standards that I've seen are for a 1-year, 24-hour storm event, and that is for post-construction. I could redraft this chart to reflect post versus pre. The state's ESC standard, that's erosion and sediment control. So that's the pre-construction or during construction standard. Requires a 10-year storm for all projects and a 25-year storm when you're next to high quality waters. That's different than the town and the county both requiring a 25-year storm standard regardless of water quality designation. My understanding in talking with Mary briefly, and she could maybe elaborate a little bit more on this when she's presenting, is that is reflective of the sloped environment that we're in here in the mountains versus the rest of the state, which is relatively flat. Just going through the county standards one more time. It was established in 2006. That's the reason why they do it right there. These are just a couple of examples of things they're requiring. They place deed restrictions on properties when stormwater requirements have been placed on them. They also reference 24% impervious or less. High density is considered 24% or higher. And the definition of density, I think for the purposes of Montreat, it's generally been 1 dwelling unit per acre. Montreat, interestingly, at least the way it was historically platted, was it was platted on a much more urban format of basically quarter acre and smaller lots. If you look through much of what I'll call the main street of Montreat, on Assembly there, most of those lots are basically 50 by 100 or 50 by 150 foot city lots. So that's just a little nugget of information for you to keep in your head, thinking about the size and impacts of projects. So again, on the front end, the county's erosion and sediment control distinguishes 2 different factors: either land size impacted, so 1 acre or more, or the slope of the property regardless of the property size. So that second bullet there is important to note. The 25-year storm is what they are requiring during erosion sediment control. They are also looking at post-construction. So again, this is on the back end after you've built something and the stormwater requirements for something after it's built. Their definition of low density is 2 units per acre or 24% impervious area. And they're looking at the 1 year, 24-hour storm. And they do list that there, that last bullet. All impervious surfaces must be a minimum of 30 feet from water bodies. So essentially, top of bank on a stream. In essence, after you have built something, is a 30-foot buffer away from that. So again, just a quick reference that the town, for the front end stormwater, the soil erosion and sediment control, that's entirely with the county. The town has its own stormwater ordinance currently. These are just some of the definitions from it. These are the 3 primary triggers: disturbing 5,000 square feet or more, or 24% of total lot area, or 2,500 square feet of additional impervious surface. These are just the requirements of the stormwater plan. This is from the town's current ordinance, differentiating large versus smaller development projects. General standards for the town do reflect the 30-foot buffer from top of bank for perennial and intermittent water bodies. The hillside development standards.
Scott, can you go back to the 2 slides back? Because I think at our last meeting, Mason, I think, raised the question on whether the actual provisions of the ordinance applied to lots that were less than 10,000 square feet. As I recall, there was a part of it that looked like there was an imposition of that, but the actual language was greater than 10,000 feet.
That's right. The provision in the ordinance requiring the retention and treatment of stormwater based on the storm standard is only under the section of, and I forget the section, but it's only under the larger project description. That specific retention requirement is not applicable to the smaller development projects. There seems to have been some enforcement confusion about that in the past, but I think one of the things we need to do is make sure we're clear on that. A plain reading of the ordinance makes it clear to me anyway that it was not intended for smaller development projects. And maybe it should be applied to them. I'm not disputing that the merits of it one way or the other, at least at this point in time. But the ordinance as drafted makes it only applicable to the larger development projects, which was not clear, candidly, Scott, in your chart on page 12 of this particular presentation. I think it deserves an asterisk until, at the very least, until we clarify that issue, so that we're clear that detention and treatment requirement is not applicable to smaller development projects.
Right. And I apologize for the confusion on that. And I'm honestly trying to navigate a ton of information.
I understand.
I think a key point that I need to, or a key question that keeps coming up in my head when I'm looking over these standards is the difference between disturbed area and whether that is for erosion and sediment control or long-term control, and simple square feet of impervious area more so for the ongoing control. So I think I'm making a note right now to really just try and hone in on that and clarify that.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. The hillside development standards, I guess the complicating factor there is that it's got intensity bonuses for impervious that may or may not be indexed to the stormwater ordinance. I haven't been able to see a clear connection between those two, but that's another item that I'm noting right now to just follow up on. Again, just quickly going through, the post-construction standards. It's treating the first inch of rainfall for a 1-year, 24-hour storm, and I believe that was it. So with that, I'm glad to just quickly go back through any of the slides or just have any brief discussion before we move on to Mary's presentation.
Yes, the standard on impervious exceeding 25% of the lot requires a stormwater plan. Is that true or not true?
That, one moment. Let's see. Yes. Per the requirements of the permit, 24% or more impervious requires a stormwater control permit currently.
And that's what I'd based my exhibit on in my presentation a few meetings ago. I think Mason's raising the thought that once you start looking at the 10,000 feet or more, that's in conflict with this 24%, and that maybe that means you ignore that 24%. I'm not sure.
Right, and as I'm staring at these three sets of standards right now, I think I don't know if I'm having a moment of clarity, but if I'm seeing this first bullet as disturbed area 5,000 square feet, when I hear disturbed area, my mind immediately goes to erosion and sediment control.
Yeah.
So the second bullet is the long-term build out. That's post-construction stormwater. That last bullet is impervious. So again, that is long-term stormwater impacts. So,
but Scott, that's not what the Montreat ordinance talks about. It doesn't differentiate that. It differentiates into larger projects and smaller projects, and requirements of larger projects and requirements of smaller projects.
Right, but
as drafted. I'm not saying what's right or wrong. I'm just saying the way.
Sure. Sure.
I think, Scott, you're right that maybe the intention, even if it's not explicit in the ordinance, the intention behind the differentiation with disturbed versus impervious is that disturbed is around erosion and sediment control. Because disturbed, well, I feel like that you're thinking in that area, Scott, makes sense, even if it's not explicit in the ordinance, although it probably should be.
Right.
And I've looked at enough of these ordinances to know how, you were looking at Buncombe counties, how detailed they are in terms of, is this an erosion and sediment control pre-construction or in construction requirement versus a term post-construction requirement.
Right.
And doesn't the ordinance state on those three things, or disturbed area, or 24%, or 25?
Yes. Yes. I believe,
Okay.
yes.
Which is why the 24% is why I had to spend the thousands of dollars I had to spend, and why the Sweetenbergs had to spend $30,000 for a one-bedroom addition. Because when the stormwater administrator pointed that to us, how did we argue with that language? And so we had to spend the money.
Right. I think, I mean, I think this, just looking at this right now, the bald face disturbed versus percentage, I think that's a key point of discussion, at least in that the percentage impervious seems to be a much more scientifically based and proportionate amount. It's not a fixed square footage amount, it's a proportionate amount. So most regulations, when they are at least reasonably fair, are proportionate versus having a fixed amount. Like food for thought.
Because that greater than 5,000 square feet, that's 0.11 acres, or 1.2 if you want to round up.
Right.
0.1 acre. Which, if we're saying a lot of the lots, 0.25, a lot of the lots are quarter acre, so 0.5. So that's, basically half of a quarter. So it's half. I mean, is it almost the same thing actually? If you're looking at a quarter acre lot,
right?
If you're not, it wouldn't be. Yeah. Right, within the context of quarter acre lots.
Right.
I will throw in here just as an aside, because I know y'all are looking at this and thinking about it. I am on the City of Asheville Stormwater Task Force, and we have a subgroup that is also currently looking at Asheville Stormwater Ordinance in detail. They've just started that process, so we haven't kind of moved forward with any findings or thinking yet. But that comparison will be happening, or that work's happening right now too. So it may be a basis of comparison as well. And that's, because I think terrain wise, where Asheville's ordinance could be comparable to, to Montreat's, there is similar like slope, hillside kind of issues in some parts of Asheville. So I think their ordinance is meant to address that. So maybe something that I can bring back to y'all as there's, more information to share in that review, because the goal of that review is to make sure the ordinance is strong enough to, protect and improve water quality. The French Broad close to being listed as a 303D water impaired. DEQ wants to list it.
Does that mean it goes to grade A?
No, well, that means it goes to the EPA. It's on the federal EPA's radar, and a lot needs to be done to clean it up so that it can meet its classification.
Okay.
And B is better than C. B includes all things C and primary recreation, which means it's supposed to be good for swimming.
Right.
A lot of water, skin to skin contact. Secondary is, you should be in a boat or have a tube, or not necessarily be. And I would say Swannanoa is just my feeling. I don't know. So that's questionable, because it's just my feeling. Sometimes it seems like Swannanoa is cleaner than the French Broad.
Sure.
But B is actually a better quality, or it should be of higher quality, so it can be used for primary recreation versus just secondary recreation, which is C.
Right.
And there's no.
Mary, that'd be great if you bring some of that back. And thinking of the timing, I heard Tom Widmer the other day say that the council intended to take up the zoning ordinance revisions as part of its planning process, which, Dan, you heard that too. I got the impression that would extend over a couple of months, so that there's no real urgency to get the stormwater done until they're done with that. So I think the timelines work well, and particularly if we could if we could know what Buncombe County was doing, that'd certainly be helpful to us.
I also, Victoria Hoyland is the new stormwater administrator for Buncombe County, and she's just reached out to me early in December. And so I've got, I've said, hey, and we'll follow back up. So this would be actually a good opportunity to follow back up with her and talk to her in more detail and in the context of Montreat's ordinance, which,
Right.
I have not looked at in a lot of detail yet. But, certainly I'd like to have a conversation with her.
Thanks.
And one of the issues that you, in your earlier slide, was the 30-foot buffer, top of the stream bank. That's for all lots in Montreat, but for the state, it's only for 1 acre or more. For Buncombe County, it's only for 1 acre or more. But Montreat is applying it to its small quarter-acre lots. And as I've stated before, on a 1 acre lot, you can adjust your development to not be too close to a stream. Quarter-acre lot, if you've got a stream, an intermittent stream, has water in it sometimes, that winds up taking the entire lot with 100% setback. And that the state and the county found it reasonable that would apply to lots 1 acre or more. And that same logic would impact you when you get to hillside development, because in Montreat's hillside development, if it reaches the threshold of 40%, then 60% of the lot may not be disturbed. And most development would be on parcels larger than that. And so then it makes sense that you can leave a large percentage of it undisturbed. If you got a quarter-acre lot and you cannot disturb 60% of the lot, then you cannot shape any of the site with a natural slope of whatever percent. You've got to use retaining walls just to get a house on it, or else build a mighty tight little house. So the part of our problem may be that we've got a square peg and round hole when we are applying things that work on acre or more, and on quarter acre, they're, too restrictive. They take the property.
And I'm gonna probably just need to really try and clarify it, but my understanding from all of the research that I've done, and at least in my own personal experience here in Asheville, as I'm actively trying to build a house along a small unnamed creek, is that the 30-foot buffer applies to lots regardless. I've got a 6,000 square foot lot that there's a 30-foot buffer on, but I'm more than willing to just try and really fully clarify that.
I was wondering about that too, Scott, because I had thought, but that doesn't, because there's so many different programs that have their own buffer thing. So I had thought that the 30-foot buffer was just for the high quality waters and not for Class C. But then you pulled up the state law from 2006 that had that 30-foot buffer on any, well, was it just any perennial stream?
Intermittent or perennial stream.
Okay, intermittent and perennial. But that's where you had highlighted that variances are approved if it renders the lot completely unusable.
That's my 5-minute understanding. Yes.
Yeah, that was the slide. So I was confused by that too. And again, this is something I would like to talk to Victoria about as well, whose job it is to enforce these things. So she should
Right.
know more about it.
That's an important.
And I'm happy to have that conversation sooner than later. I mean, I'll try to schedule a meeting with her. Set it up so that we meet within the next weeks.
I think that's been Wade's primary concern, as I recall his presentations. And it would be, that's an interesting distinction that the 30 feet applies, but they routinely would grant variances if it makes it undevelopable. And that might be a useful standard. In a sense, it's no standard, but at least it gives some discretion.
It provides, it's providing an out. And that's, I think that's the general, that's generally the most legal approach to most development regulations.
Right, but as I read that squib you highlighted, Scott, that was, it provided a variance, but with mitigation, making sure the function was equal.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me see if I can just go back to it right quick. Yes. Major variances covering impacts to the inner zone, i.e. the 30-foot buffer closest to the water, are allowed. And then, yes, the second sentence, management of flows and mitigation of the impacts. So that's my quick reading, that you can essentially be closer as long as you are mitigating your quantity of stormwater coming off.
That's not in our ordinance though, and so the prior zoning administrator said, tough luck.
That's my goal is to clarify that here and now with you all. Does anybody else have any other questions, or should we move on to Mary's presentation on some kind of more specifics for Montreat?
Let's move on.
Okay. Let me stop my share.
Okay, and I'll say I did not prepare a presentation as such. My understanding was that you shared my slides at the last planning and zoning meeting that gave the high level overview of the work that Blue Earth is doing and why and all that. You did that. You laid that groundwork.
That's correct. I did.
Okay, so what?
Yeah, I apologize if I set you up for set up expectations of a presentation, but I know you're able to offer some more information and explanation of
Sure
projects.
I can. Yes, yeah. So I just wanted to make sure we're
You're off
that
no worries.
that groundwork has been laid, right? Of like why we're doing this, and you know, what I thought I could do is show a few of the outputs, both that we already have for Montreat and also the Central Asheville Watershed Plan, which they've just been involved in and completed. That kind of gives an idea of what I think the concept plan will include. That is, you know, that's still something. I expect a draft of the concept plan within this quarter, and
Sure.
Then that is something that we can share with y'all, obviously, so that you can see it. I think we'll share it back to the respondents to the survey that we did, where people were able. Thank you, Alex. Where people were able to, you know, talk about their concerns, stormwater concerns, and issues that they're seeing. And I mean, we can, you know, obviously post the draft via town's website. But I think what I would like probably to do is to run it through y'all first, just so, because you're actively really thinking about this and concerned, and make sure we kind of incorporate your feedback before we do a full public draft. Does that make sense to y'all?
Yes.
And it,
Yeah.
okay. And, you know, not having the ordinance on my radar, you know, the work of Blue Earth has been contractually defined with DEQ and, you know, with this grant to focus on more project-based interventions. So but they tend to also include some policy when they're looking at things, not necessarily at the detail of an ordinance. But let me show you an example. I will, where did oh, there it is, the bright green thing. I'm gonna share, like to share screen too. Okay, the whole screen. So, all right, you should see just a PDF. I'm moving my mouse around an image in the middle of the screen.
Yes.
Do you see my screen? Okay. First
Yes.
of all, I'm going to go back to the actual report, or the interactive report, which is more fun to look at, and hope that when I try to reload the priority project page this time, actually, before I do that, we will not have this deliverable, I should say. This is an interactive online watershed plan. And that is not what we're looking at for our concept plan. It's much more focused on stormwater itself. So one of these tabs, stormwater runoff. You know, we're not as concerned about illicit discharges in your community. You know, certainly flooding occurs, and that is linked to stormwater, but it's not the riverine flooding that they're also looking at here. So this is kind of high. This is a full-blown watershed plan, and the Upper Swannanoa River watershed plan that we worked with Equinox on in 2014 technically fills this role for DEQ's purposes and covers Montreat. But my argument to DEQ when I went back for more money is that none of the projects that they identified were in Montreat. They were all Black Mountain, and they were all in flat areas of Black Mountain. So they didn't address the unique terrain of Montreat. And so I said it would strengthen our watershed plan if we went back and did a very specific steep slope stormwater management concept plan. And I emphasize the term concept because they're not getting into kind of the construction or even, you know, the design level that you would need to build. That would be a next step, is that we identify, you know, a few high impact projects. Wade, I agree with you that you know, we want of course, there's on one side what every homeowner does with their property, and there's a lot of those properties, so that adds up. But there's also, you know, clear issues that you're dealing with that kind of a targeted project could address, and we can seek funding to do that, to implement that. And then the design, the actual construction level designs would be done within that context. So what they've done here is also identify these kind of potential priority projects in this watershed. And I do expect something similar. So I'm afraid it's going to do what it did before and not actually show me any of the project. Oh, yay, it's showing them now. Okay, they're coming. All right, so so you should see this colorful little map here. It's got sub-watersheds for, and again, this is Central Asheville right below downtown. And then within each of the sub-watersheds, they've identified there's the yellow diamond is a stormwater control measure that's a detention or bioretention measure. You know, those things are harder in Montreat because there's not a lot of public right-of-way. But we talked about the potential, and this is something, you know, we'll come back to y'all with, of maybe reducing the size of that gravel parking lot up by the Public Works facility, for example. Since that's no longer town hall, if that parking lot doesn't need to be as large as that, gravel doesn't need to be as large as it is, could something be done there to help deal with was that Rainbow Road and the runoff from there? You know, we've just kind of we were kicking around a few ideas, but they're just starting that process, which is why they're not here presenting to you today, because they don't have those projects kind of clearly defined yet. But you know, stormwater control measures like, you know, or a rain garden like y'all have at Town Hall now. Again, those are harder to do in the steep slope environment. Trash controls, I don't think is as big of an issue. They've got some infrastructure and project maintenance. And we did identify a few infrastructure areas with some of the outfalls. I can show you that in a moment. Stream and channel restoration, riparian area management, restoration, stream bank or slope stabilization. And this is the one I want to emphasize, disconnected impervious surface, this orange dot. So that is something, so neighborhood, so they've got a detailed fact sheet and a cost summary here, and they're going to give me some of that high level information as well. But that's one of the things that Tim and Marshall said, that, you know, they, in terms of providing alternatives to homeowners, aside from those expensive rainwater vaults that people are installing, looking at some of these disconnected impervious surface techniques. Now, I don't have the details on what those would be for Montreat yet, but I think that are kind of, that still help reduce stormwater runoff, but are not as expensive as the vaults, which a lot of developers or builders will go to, because that's straightforward, it's known, but it's expensive, as I think y'all are mentioning and are reacting and responding to and thinking about how to adjust your ordinance. So disconnected impervious surface is one of the things that I think they will be exploring. I know Tim did several demonstration projects in Mars Hill, and some of that involved like some terracing, which I thought was really interesting. That may be something that they bring into this. It's really going to kind of depend on the analysis that they've done. And that analysis comes from both I'm going to switch screens now, switch maps. That comes from both the stormwater inventory that my colleague John did together with Public Works, going out and geolocating every inlet, every outfall, all of the pipes. I have to zoom in more so you see the pipes. So we have your entire stormwater system inventory here. John did document some issues. Let's click on one of these. What is it? Needs riprap. That's John's. That may not necessarily be what they, because sometimes riprap can actually increase the problem downstream. So I think that's a go-to, but it's not necessarily what Blue Earth will recommend. But they
Mary,
go ahead.
The one thing that Wade included in his presentation, as I recall, was the idea of I'll call it a quote regional unquote retention area. And I don't mean for the whole region, but I mean for a region within Montreat, instead of requiring the retention on each individual lot, that there could be flowing into a larger area. And is that something that y'all have talked about, or is that something we should just be put on our discussion list?
I can certainly bring that back to them. Wade, you met with them, so you can speak to what y'all discussed. I mean, I'd say it's still always going to be a combination of both, even if I would assume, there's not a large enough area, and the watershed doesn't drain in a way that you could capture all the runoff from all the properties, right? Like even if you did have some sort of community retention facility. My concern there too would be, I think that's certainly something to talk about. I can't think of where that would go, right? I think there's a ball field somewhere. I'm sure they won't necessarily want us to turn that into that type of facility. But Wade, what did you talk about with Marshall and Tim? Did you all talk about that?
Yeah, Tim and Marshall, we saw that there are any number of areas that you have a chance to put in a retention facility. We've got a lot of switchbacks. So in a switchback, when we've got a rain event, you've got a lot of water moving to one side or another of that switchback. And so the land, what you'll call the pocket created by that switchback, is public land.
Is it? Okay.
And that's something that you can actually grade from the road, drop a vault in, and even maintain and so forth, and that may be covered the area of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 houses.
Okay.
And that we've got areas where the right-of-way is bizarre and large.
Okay.
And then you've got the peculiar thing that the water in a rain event has figured out over the last 10,000 years how to get down to the stream. And so one of the ones that I'm familiar with, family home, is a trickle most of the time. In a rain event, it's full force, and we survived both hurricanes of 04 or whatever. It sort of figured out how to create its bank over few thousand years.
Yeah.
Others you can flat out, but the idea of in the rights of way and the switchbacks and so forth that you can capture some, and then
Okay.
are two primary places you could capture a lot, and went over those with Tim and Marshall, and they thought they had merit. And one
Okay.
at the foot of Rainbow, across from the old town hall, creating a larger retention piece that could be maintained with a front end loader, getting silt out and so forth, because that has nothing to do with Montreat other than it dumps all of the fines from a gravel state road in Black Mountain right into our creek, Flat Creek, right there at that point. And the second one was between our lake and the first bridge above it, that we have a tremendous amount of accumulation in Lake Susan.
Mhm.
And in 04 or 05, the lake was drained, at incredible cost, looked like a mining operation with the giant vehicles getting all that silt out. Now it's built back up again in just these few years. So there was a way to put in something about maybe 80 yards long that was catching silt coming down toward the lake, and that could be cleaned out every certain period, far more economically.
Right. Okay. Kind of a forebay.
And do an awful lot of what we're trying to do. Catch a
Right.
lot.
Right. Okay. So just as a precedent, New York City has something, you may have heard of green streets, but they have something that are called blue streets. And I think it's doing what you're talking about in these switchback areas where they're really designed for managing water, right? So, I mean, in Green Street infrastructure, I mean, that's the idea behind buying green streets, but they wanted to really emphasize that this is a water management feature. So I will, you know, I'm sure you've talked about that with them, but I will reiterate and discuss that with them as well. And what I would like for them to do is to provide, you know, some hard numbers. I mean, they're engineers, right? I'm not an engineer. Like hydraulically, what are we, not just hydrologically, I can calculate runoff, but hydraulically, what are we looking at in terms of reduction of velocity? Because that's important to reduce damage to your infrastructure, like what you saw in Tropical Storm Alberto. Hydraulically, what kind of benefit and gain can we see from some of these things that we're talking about right now? So I will ask for that kind of analysis. Benefit. Okay. That's helpful. Were there kind of other, so this stormwater system map is available, it's finished, it's been shared with Public Works. It will meet your stormwater permit requirements that DEQ has for mapping your stormwater system. And we do have some water quality information in here as well. Josh Holbrook is doing the in-stream monitoring, and he is still collecting data. So I don't have any sort of data report from him yet. But I do, you know, their Blue Earth looked at erosion. So the assessment piece is, well, you know, we know you have stormwater, but where are the impacts the worst? And you've brought up some of them, Wade, in terms of the sedimentation in Lake Susan. You know, certainly the things coming off of Rainbow Road, or what is it Rainbow Road? I apologize for not using the right terminology. I just haven't seen.
Rainbow Road, I think.
It is Rainbow Road. Okay. So they walked several linear feet of multiple streams, over 6,000 linear feet, I believe, and did a bank erosion hazard index assessment, and actually found relatively little erosion, but that's actually because the stream's largely bedrock, I think. I don't know that that's the best indicator. but that's kind of what's going into this, just so you have some background, is both, you know, where's the existing stormwater system. And let me show you an outfall.
Mary, as you make that turn, is there a possibility that we can also get you to send those charts to us so that we'll be able to view them?
Yeah, so this map is public, so you should be, and did I include the link in my previous, I'll check, but I'll make sure that I'll give it to Scott and he can include it in your minutes or however is easiest.
That's great. Yeah, if he could print it off, some of us would like to see it on paper rather than.
Oh, okay.
But
yeah,
that would be something Scott could do.
Yeah, I would say I can help assist, you know, in terms of talking through it, because we do not have a print of it.
Okay. Okay.
But I think you'll have to print it in quadrants to get, you know, the level of detail. But one thing about the interactive map is you can go in to, this is something you can look at it. So this is something they're using.
Oh, neat. Sure. Oh, that's
so you can
great.
see kind of how water's being diverted into this. I wanted an outfall though. I'm keep picking. I just closed the wrong thing. Sorry. I just closed it. I wanted to show you outfalls because those are what they're looking at in terms of seeing kind of how the stormwater is impacting the creeks. I like those images are interesting. I'll have to, it takes a minute to go back through. I have to log back into our system because I don't have the link off the top of my head. So yes, we will make sure that you have access to, let me go back to this and have access to that map in a print form.
Right. Good.
I can, you know, kind of walk you through that in terms of kind of printing, so you have it in at a scale that's useful, and you have it in your office there.
Well, the electronic link is helpful because, as you just showed, we could then see what the particular facility looks like. So
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So that was kind of the first big milestone of the project. And then this kind of the stream assessment that they did is the next component, and ongoing is the water quality monitoring that Josh Holbrook is doing. And he's in case you're not, he's a professor at Montreat College, and he's also working with the Montreat stream team and Bill Seaman. So there's that group of people engaged in this, and and then this final the phase we're in right now is kind of after doing the survey and like, you know, having conversations with people like Mr. Burns, really coming up with this kind of suite, as I'm showing here, this suite of interventions that are spatially explicit, like where would they go, and kind of high level, what would they look like, and what could they potentially cost. Now, Wade, you brought up an important point, which is operation and maintenance, you know, and so I think that is something we'll want to kind of think about and have, you know, that's a longer term conversation in terms of what's reasonable to expect of public works, for example, in maintaining any sort of publicly operated stormwater control measures. And so I will ask them if they can consider that as well, the operation and maintenance component, because that's going to be important, I think, before making decisions. Is, you know, can the town afford? I mean, you know, it's like, well, do you pay for it on the front end or the back end? Like, I don't know. I'm not a budgeter really, so I'm just saying.
And that may be outside. That may be outside of our purview because we're looking more at just the ordinance itself and how development happens. Yeah.
We have an excellent public works staff that certain weeks runs 80 to 100 hours, and they are always clearing culverts. Yeah. And catch basins. So most everything that you're showing on the map is merely where we got storm water, we put a catch basin, so we take it under the road and dump it on the other side of the road. Mm-hmm. So when you were trying to find the outfalls, those are the challenges. But the outfalls are basically going into a stream everywhere right away. Right. And so that's where it sort of needs to be more of of a master plan that you identify areas that are the easiest to capture and capture the most muck for the buck.
I like that.
And
And potentially shift the maintenance work from what, some of that, I think that's a good conversation for Blue Earth to have with Public Works. I don't think they have kind of where are their big maintenance headaches related to stormwater, right? Like there's every catch basin thing, but are there particular areas where they're noticing that they're having to do a lot, and kind of could that effort be reduced and moved more to a maintenance component rather than a reactionary, a big storm happened and we have to go spend a bunch of time and energy cleaning this up? Can we maintain it with less effort over time, maintain a measure, a control measure with less effort over time, and avoid that big impact down the road that we have to deal with? So I like that. And I will, if they have not talked to Public Works already, I will ask them to do so. Public Works. I believe they should have, at least in terms of where Public Works is seeing issues, because they're obviously the ones on the ground dealing with it. John had a lot of good things. Is his name Mike? Is that one of the guys? So he had a lot of good things to say about him. He said he was really, he was very engaged in this process of finding the infrastructure, really taking notes about, what condition it's in. Okay, so this one's inactive. I'm finally clicking on the right color, the reds. Needs cleaning. So yeah, there it is. It's hard to see, but this little guy down here, that's the outfall, and it does need cleaning. So anyway, yeah, I agree. John said Mike was
Yeah, Mike's super duper.
yeah, he was on it. So okay, well, I think are we running long? And I apologize for that if we are.
That's fine. I don't know that what you can do now in between of what you're going to learn from the Asheville project, that'll probably be more helpful.
Yep.
Facilities themselves. So I found this very fascinating and interesting. So.
Well, I will certainly follow up both, the task force, we were supposed to meet yesterday, but the Public Works Director is participating and he wasn't available. So we will be meeting this month. I'll have a better idea of where the ordinance subcommittee is. And I will reach out to Victoria Hoyland, the Stormwater Administrator for Buncombe County, this week and set up a meeting to talk with her as well.
Right. Right.
And kind of some of these things like 30-foot buffer variances, smaller. I mean, they do have smaller lots too. Kind of what is she seeing? How are they managing that? And then in terms of the Blue Earth team, talking about this Blue Street concept, I'll say, but this, these retention options within the switchbacks, and these two potential areas of retention that Wade mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah.
That'd be very helpful. Anybody have any questions or comments?
well, the big piece.
I was curious, Montreat Land Care, I guess we need to keep them somewhat in mind. I'm not sure what they're working on versus what we're working on. I know ordinances are different than what they're planning, but I know they've put out a rain garden literature and done some various things. I don't know what all they're working on.
Yeah, I think our focus is probably on the development side and how we can make things fair and still protect the quality of the area. So, Dan, did you want to say something?
I was just going to reiterate something you said earlier, unrelated to what we're talking about right now. But as far as timetable, you had mentioned our conversation with Tom. I got the impression that the council is not going to be wrestling with the zoning ordinance that we spent 2 years on. It may take them several months.
Yeah.
least to get through that. So I don't think there's any urgency to what we're working on, except as it may impact some developer or Wade working on another project in the meantime. But
Yeah.
just a comment on the timetable. I agree with what you said earlier.
Okay.
And one point of clarity I'll make on timeline is that my understanding zoning ordinance, absent any changes to hillside or stormwater, which are currently in the general ordinances, my understanding is that the zoning ordinance needs to be adopted by July 1st of this summer to meet state requirements for Chapter 160D. That's the new
Good.
land use.
That's helpful. I don't think we knew that. We had messed around with an effective date, but that's very helpful.
What was the deadline? What was the deadline you said, Scott?
July 1st.
Okay.
I don't think they even had the deadline in place when we started.
I don't think so either.
And I will clarify that, but I've seen that in a couple of different references, and I could also just coordinate with Stuart Bass from Land of Skies Council, because I know he's been doing Chapter 160D updates for several other communities, and he's probably got a much quicker pulse on, I say, the realness of the flexibility of that deadline.
Okay. Well, with that in mind, would y'all like to meet again first week in February, or do you want to go back to every 2 weeks? I think I know the answer to that.
We're going to take a little break.
I think the first week in February is probably would give them time to get things done. And in the meantime, I would urge us all to revisit and just reread, and in light of this discussion and what Scott's going to send out, reread the ordinance and get some specifics in mind, like how we might interact with the way Buncombe County treats the 30-foot with variances, et cetera, et cetera. And
Bill, could I ask a question while we've got Mary here?
sure.
Yes, sir.
Mary, how, you know, the difference in the ordinance, all these ordinances require the treatment from pre-development for post-development. They require the detention and treatment of that volume of discharge based on the amount of impervious area. I mean, just looking at it logically, particularly in steep slope areas like Montreat, frankly, very little retention takes place. Particularly in a huge storm event, because it's all running off, and it all runs off quickly. I mean, it does. It's almost minuscule, the amount. So so given that fact, how are those volumes calculated? The actual volumes that are applied in the restrictions, do they take into consideration the steepness of the slope of the actual development site? Or is there just some sort of statewide standard that's developed somewhere for probably a piece of flat land with impervious or pervious soils?
That is a very good question, and one that I'm writing down because I have not asked or answered that question for myself either. But that is an extremely good point. That, you know, this idea of like forested versus developed, and, you know, maintaining pre-development conditions. If that's very steep and bedrock underneath and not these permeable soils and everything's running off anyway, like, is there a difference? That's good. Very good point.
And I frankly think it goes to I'm a lawyer, I apologize for that.
Yeah, that's all
But
right.
it goes to the legality of the regulation itself. If you're asking people to remedy a problem they're not causing, that's not a legal regulation. If there's no nexus between the two.
Good point. I'm glad you raised that. It is. I'm curious. I will find an answer.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Mason. Well, let's look at our calendars. Let me go over the first Thursday in February is the 4th. Would y'all like to meet then? same time?
Works for me.
And one question would be whether, whether we considered the evening meetings. I know David can't make these daytime meetings. The commission always met in the evening because there was usually somebody that worked. Of course, a lot of folks in retirement age wind up working anyway because somebody needs them. But anyway, that might be something to consider. Maybe check with Dave if he could begin meeting with us again if we.
Well, what would y'all feel about me? I personally would not like to meet in the evening, but 4 o'clock would be fine with me. Maybe he could. What do y'all think about the meeting times?
Work good.
I know the original change today had to do with Montreat's staff staying till 7:30.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
So we're either
Good point.
inconveniencing the staff or inconvenience, there's not a great answer.
Right.
I'm flexible either way, as long as it stays on Thursdays.
Okay, so I just should keep it at the 10:30 if y'all are willing to do that. Okay, so let's say 10:30 on the 4th of February.
Good.
Works for me.
And Mary, I hope that that's okay with you because we'd love to have you again.
Sure. If it's, I assume we'll at least have met with Victoria by then and should have something from the stormwater ordinance crew from Asheville. So yeah, I can plan to share about that. Not sure where we'll be with our concept plan by then. And I will plan to invite Marshall and or Tim anyway to present that when it's far enough along to share with y'all.
That's great. And Scott, if the COVID stuff is us, I'm hoping we can meet in person. This is delightful to see everybody on the screen, but boy, it sure is nice to meet in person. So
Sure, understood.
let's try to do that. Yeah. So
I think we're gonna have to get more people vaccinated first. I'm hopeful, but
yeah,
I'm afraid I'm way down on the list in terms of vaccinations.
we just got ours this morning. We got the
Yeah.
word for the number, so we're going to have it next week.
Excellent.
So,
I'm afraid we're way down the list. Us young folks got to wait a little while.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
well, I turned 75 3 days ago, so I just fit into what
Oh,
Happy birthday.
yeah.
Well, Bill Shy, don't get off the line before you give me the number because I'm 75 and
All right, I'll email it to you, Wade. I just sent that to Tom Whitmer. So I'll send it to you. All right, was there any more business to come before us? I really want to thank Scott and Mary. This was a very interesting presentation. I really learned a lot. I hope everybody did, and it'll spark a lot of good discussion, I think, and solutions. So, great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good week.
Angie. Thanks, Angie and Alex, for setting it up.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
Stay safe, folks.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.